What's up, guys? It's a lovely day, so I thought I'm going to film outside. But the question I'm going to be answering today is how hard should I train and how much effort should I put into each set? And I think the simple answer to this is if you're not happy with the way you look and you're not happy with your rate of progress, then simply training harder than you do right now will ensure that progress. It will speed up the rate of muscle growth and the rate of progress. You can begin to worry about overtraining and under recovering and ask those questions. But for me, I'd rather have that problem. If I'm not happy with my rate of progress, then I have two problems. I either just stay unhappy with the rate of progress, or I can have the problem of being overtrained and under recovered but still making progress. That's going to be further down the line. And I think you've got to pick your battles. I think for me, if I'm not happy with my rate of progress, then the most reliable way to increase that is most likely to train harder, especially for the average person, because the average person doesn't have to worry about overtraining or under recovering because they don't train that hard. I'm going to be honest, even myself, I'm fairly advanced now. I've been training 6 years. I'd say I'm probably towards late intermediate, early advanced stage. And even myself, there's times where I'm not training as hard as I could do. I like to think I train pretty hard. I mean, I'm going to overlay this footage with videos of me training, but there's definitely times where I look back and I don't train as hard as I could do. I felt like I could have had one rep left or no reps, and I watched the video and I'm like, I've got like 3 more reps there, to be honest. And if I were to just milk that and get those reps, then I would see more progress as a result. But yeah, before I move on to specific advice, I think the best thing to do in this scenario is to either get a training partner, because simply just having someone watching you there is a good way to just train harder. If someone watches you do your set, you are way more likely to push it to failure. I've started training with my own clients recently just for this reason, because if I have my client standing there watching me, I'm way more likely to push that final rep, especially given that he's my client and I essentially set the standard for how hard you need to train. I also think throwing in some partials and drop sets and any beyond failure techniques are also good for breaking plateaus and pushing beyond failure. But moving on to the specific, and I think if you nail this, you don't actually need to worry too much about going beyond failure. To be specific, if you stick by this one rule, you should be fine for most of your training career. And that is to leave no more than 2 reps in reserve on every set you complete. No more. At an absolute maximum, 2 reps in reserve, and you should be okay for most of your lifting career. So what does that mean? So for those who don't know what reps in reserves mean, it means if I was to train with 2 reps in reserve, it means when I finish that set, say I do a set of 10, at absolute most, if someone had a gun to my head, I could have got 12, but I've cut those last 2 short. So why no more than 2 reps? And I think that's because the sets need to be challenging. In fact, I don't think the sets do need to be challenging. The sets need to be challenging if you want to grow muscle and force progressive overload. You need to give your body a reason to grow. You need to give it a stimulus, something that it has to adapt to, something that's like, holy shit, I've not done this before. I best grow some muscle to compensate for this stimulus. That's basically essentially how the body works. You know, when you get ill, you get your immune system that fights the disease. When you train really hard, your recovery system builds the muscle so it's more prepared for the next time. If you train like a pussy or you don't train hard enough, then you just simply don't give that reason to grow. And it's a waste of time because you still leave the gym feeling pretty tired, but you don't leave the gym with any reason to grow. So you end up staying fairly plateaued. Moreover, if you standardize this way of training, then you know when you do add weight that it is actually progressive overload. What you don't want to do is train with 3 to 4 reps in reserve, and then the next week you train with 2 reps in reserve, and the next week you train with no reps in reserve. So you've added 4 reps over the course of 2 weeks. Sounds like progress. On paper, you've made progress, but in actual fact, you haven't actually made any progress. The muscle hasn't been any more challenged than it is already capable of. So it is important that you actually standardize your way of training and how many reps in reserve, you leave. And as a rule of thumb, I always say 2 to 0 reps in reserve. I try to push towards 0 myself personally, but looking at these videos, you may disagree and may think that I have potentially 2. Either way, at that point when I'm putting the barbell back or I'm putting the dumbbells back, I know that the muscle has been challenged enough, and I can tell by the feeling in my muscle and my previous experience that I've given the muscle enough reason to grow and enough reason to add another rep the week after. I think if you train this way, you don't have to worry too much about beyond failure techniques. You can make enough progress from your own sets, from your regular sets, that training beyond failure and drop sets and partials and rest pause and whatever else you want to throw in, they are techniques that are only needed for when you actually hit that plateau that you can't break through. I think your programming becomes really simple because you don't actually have to worry about them until the time is needed. You actually just make progress by training hard enough from your regular cable rows and your barbell rows and your bench presses and your chest machines and your whatever else you do. You can make enough progress through them simply just through training hard week in, week out, that you don't actually have to worry about all this other stuff you're seeing on social media. You can keep it very, very simple by standardizing your form, standardizing your effort, and going all in on a few exercises that you like whilst rotating through the variations. You don't have to overly overthink things and overcomplicate things like people do on social media. Anyway, I believe I've covered everything I wanted to speak about today. I hope the video gives some insight about realistically how much effort you should be putting into each set. And when I say realistic, I mean realistic because this is for the average person I'm speaking to. I'm not speaking to people. The people who take every single set to failure are obviously pro bodybuilders. They dedicate their whole lives to bodybuilding. I'm talking about people who work and want to train and get in shape. I'm talking about to the average person that wants to push themselves and see what they're capable of whilst living like a normal life, right? And this is a good way. This is a good method of training. This will make you the progress without having to overcomplicate things. So yeah, if the video has helped, please give it a like as it helps me out. Drop a comment, that also helps me out. And hopefully I'll see you in the next video.